Level 0. There's something you've never thought about. And I already know you haven't because almost nobody does. Every time your phone screams that emergency alert, every time a meteorologist points at a rotating hook on the radar and tells you exactly which town, which street, how many minutes you have, every time you grab the kids and head to the basement, you do all of that without thinking about who built that system, or when, or what had to happen before anyone decided to build it at all. That warning system didn't exist until 1950. Before 1950, when that same violent sky appeared over an American town, there was nothing. No alert, no radar, no broadcast, no one on the radio telling you to move. The air would go wrong, pressure would drop, the light would shift into something with no name. Then whatever came next just came. And what came next, again and again, was a kind of destruction that's hard to sit with, now that we live on the other side of it. May 7th, 1840. Natchez, Mississippi. A Sunday afternoon, flatboats and steamboats loaded with people line the Mississippi River when the tornado arrives. 317 people died, an almost certain undercount because many victims were enslaved people and river laborers, whose deaths were never formally recorded. People just called it the storm. There was no other name for it. No category, no scale, no official record of what the wind speed had been, just the number of bodies and the silence after. The Natchez tornado is one of the earliest violent tornadoes in documented American history, and its death toll sat in the record books largely unacknowledged for decades because the people it killed were not the people the record books were built to count. May 27th, 1896, St. Louis, Missouri. A tornado descends on downtown, collapses a steel bridge into the Mississippi, and kills 255 people while injuring over 1,000 more. One newspaper described residents initially dismissing the approaching darkness as an unusual cloud formation. By the time it became impossible to dismiss, it was already on top of them. St. Louis was a city of 450,000 people. Not one received a warning. The tornado didn't care that it was hitting a major American city. The atmosphere never has. But neither of those storms defines this era. March 18th, 1925, a Wednesday. Unremarkable morning in the Missouri Ozarks. Then, near Ellington, a tornado touches down and immediately does something no storm on record had done. It doesn't hop and skip. It locks onto the ground and stays. It tracks northeast for 3.5 hours, between 60 and 73 miles per hour, so fast that some towns heard it arrive before they saw it. 219 miles, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana. Murfreesboro, Illinois alone, 234 killed, the most deaths from a single tornado in any one American town, a record that still stands. DeSoto, Illinois, a school destroyed, 33 children dead. Survivor accounts from towns along the path describe a darkness that moved, a sound like nothing anyone had heard before, and then complete silence. People in the next town over saw the sky go wrong and had no word for what was coming. No warning had been issued. None could be. By the time it lifted near Petersburg, Indiana, 695 people were gone. Here is the detail that turns tragedy into something worse. The U.S. Weather Bureau had officially banned its own forecasters from using the word tornado in public communications since 1887. The reasoning, it would cause public panic. So, for 38 years, meteorologists who understood what they were seeing were forbidden from saying it out loud. 695 people died in one afternoon, and the agency that might have warned them had a written policy against doing so. It took until 1950, 25 years after the tri-state, to lift the ban. The silence ended. The science started moving. But in the 1950s, the storms arrived before science did, and they headed straight for the cities. Level 1. The 1950s were supposed to be America's exhale. The war was over. Suburbs expanding, television in the living room, a general national conviction that modern life had solved most of the serious problems. Tornadoes were still understood culturally as things that happened to farms. Flat, wide-open farms out in the middle of nowhere, nowhere near your new split-level ranch house. Then Waco happened. May 11th, 1953, 4:10 p.m. Waco, Texas, a city of 80,000 people. A tornado hits downtown at the exact moment the streets are full of people finishing their workdays. The 5-story R.H. Penny Company department store collapses completely, burying people under several floors of rubble. Accounts from the day describe bystanders standing in the street, watching the funnel approach. Not out of recklessness, but because the idea of a tornado destroying downtown Waco on a Tuesday simply hadn't existed in anyone's mental model. 114 people were killed, over 600 injured. 1 month later, June 8th, 1953, Flint, Michigan. The Flint Beecher tornado cuts through dense residential neighborhoods, 1.5 miles wide, killing 116 people in roughly 10 minutes. The storm was so wide and so fast that people in its path had no practical ability to move out of it even if they'd known it was coming. 340 homes gone. It remains the deadliest tornado in Michigan history. What the Flint Beecher tornado demonstrated in numbers impossible to argue with was that width and speed together create a different kind of danger than intensity alone. A 1.5 mile wide storm moving at pace doesn't give a neighborhood time to react. It doesn't give a street time to react. In 10 minutes, 116 people were dead and a community had been permanently changed. 2 tornadoes, 2 months apart, 2 states. Both produced more than 100 deaths. 1953 retired permanently the idea that cities were outside the tornado problem. What made the scientific response notable was that the tools for earlier warnings already partially existed. Air Force meteorologists Ernest Fawbush and Robert Miller had successfully forecast a tornado back in 1948, demonstrating that prediction was possible. The official story of that forecast involves Fawbush and Miller staring at weather maps late at night, quietly concluding conditions matched the tornado that had struck Tinker Air Force Base weeks earlier, briefing their commanding officer and watching nervously as a tornado touched down almost exactly where they said it would. The Air Force was impressed. The Civilian Weather Bureau was skeptical, in part because of residual caution from the decades-long "don't say tornado" era. The 1953 disasters finally broke through that resistance. The argument that warnings might cause panic looked considerably less compelling, with 114 people buried under a department store. The 1957 Fargo, North Dakota tornado offered a glimpse of what real-time warnings could do. Meteorologist Seymour Rosenfeld tracked the storm live and broadcast a play-by-play over the radio, guiding residents to shelter as it moved through the city. 10 people died. Given the storm's urban path, it could have been far worse. Real-time information, clearly delivered, saved lives. The idea seems obvious now. In 1957, it was still being proven. These storms forced a scientific generation to confront what the ban era had made easy to ignore. People in cities were dying in numbers that demanded a formal response, and the tools to at least partially warn them already existed. The National Weather Service began building the infrastructure that would define the next era of tornado response. New research programs launched. A new generation of meteorologists started training. The question had shifted from whether tornadoes could be understood to whether they could be understood fast enough to matter. The 1950s answered that question with urgency. The 1970s would answer it with scale. What if the atmosphere didn't send one tornado, or two, but 148 of them, all at once across half the country? Level 2. Meteorologists were watching the radar with that specific unease that comes from a setup that is not just bad, but textbook bad. When the first tornado touched down at 1 p.m. in central Illinois on April 3, 1974. Powerful jet stream, extreme instability, abundant Gulf moisture, every ingredient simultaneously present in the right quantities in the right positions. Then another tornado formed, then another, then another. By midnight, 148 tornadoes had torn across 13 states from Alabama to Michigan in less than 18 hours. Not 148 weak funnels. 30 were rated F4 or F5 on the original Fujita scale. 6 hit F5, the absolute maximum. The 1974 Super Outbreak killed 335 people, injured over 5,000, and produced destruction across a geographic footprint roughly the size of Western Europe. The Xenia, Ohio tornado struck at 4:40 p.m., a mile wide, destroying over 1,000 homes and killing 34 people. Aerial photographs of the aftermath show city blocks where structures simply do not exist anymore. Not collapsed, not damaged, just absent. The high school was demolished mid-afternoon while students were still present. 9 people died there. Survivors described looking up through what had been the gymnasium ceiling and seeing open sky where there should have been rafters. Xenia became the defining image of the outbreak. Across those 13 states, the same story repeated. Brandenburg, Kentucky. F5, 31 killed. Gwynn, Alabama. F5, 25 killed. Communities hit by the first wave of tornadoes were still pulling survivors from rubble when the second wave arrived. In some areas, first responders had already been killed by earlier storms before later ones hit. Ted Fujita personally flew over and walked the 1974 damage paths in the days after. What he documented confirms something that wind speed numbers alone couldn't convey. F5 destruction didn't look like very bad. F4 destruction, it occupied a different category, one where the usual vocabulary of damage simply didn't apply because there was nothing left to assess. His surveys turned 1974 into one of the most important data sets in tornado research history, and forced a direct question. How do you warn people about 148 tornadoes developing simultaneously across half a continent? In 1974, the answer was that you couldn't. Something larger had to be built. The outbreak directly drove investment in the research programs that would eventually deploy mobile radar units into the field, build the NextRad network, and produce the measurement that would change everything 25 years later. Every piece of infrastructure that saved lives in 2011 traces a line back, in part, to the 148 tornadoes that fell through the cracks in 1974. The death of the Super Outbreak funded, indirectly, the science that protected the living who came after them. But what if the next outbreak dwarfs 1974? What if 148 tornadoes in one day is not a ceiling, but a preview? Level 3, May 3, 1999. The Storm Prediction Center issued a particularly dangerous situation tornado watch over central Oklahoma before noon. That language is reserved for days when violent, long-track tornadoes aren't merely possible but expected. Forecasters used words like extraordinary and historic before a single storm had formed. 58 tornadoes touched down across Oklahoma and Kansas that evening. One became the Bridge Creek Moore tornado. What happened when a research radar locked onto its core changed what scientists knew was real. The number that came back, 301 miles per hour, the highest wind speed ever directly measured near Earth's surface. Anywhere, in any context. Not in a hurricane, not in any other recorded atmospheric event. At that velocity, standard lumber doesn't fly, it penetrates. Objects don't land somewhere nearby, they travel hundreds of yards. The distance between damaged and disintegrated essentially disappears. To put it another way, at 301 miles per hour, a car is not blown off the road. It is thrown. A house is not blown down. It is taken apart piece by piece in under a second. The instrument that captured that number was pointed at the storm from a research vehicle parked in a field. The scientists inside knew what they were measuring. The number still surprised them. The tornado killed 36 people, injured over 500, and destroyed more than 8,000 homes along a 38-mile path. The warning system worked. A tornado emergency was issued. People knew, and 36 still died. Before 1999, every tornado wind speed estimate was theoretical, reverse-engineered from damage using engineering models. Bridge Creek Moore gave science an actual number from an actual instrument for the first time in history. It also opened one uncomfortable question. If this was the first direct measurement ever taken, how fast had the 1925 tri-state been? The 1974 F5s. The instruments didn't exist. Those numbers are simply unknown, not because those storms were weaker, but because nobody was measuring them. The city of Moore, struck directly in 1999, would be hit again by significant tornadoes in 2003, 2010, and 2013. It has been struck more times by violent tornadoes than almost any city in American history relative to its size. Meteorologists have studied why. Moore sits in a geographic corridor that storm tracks favor under the atmospheric setups most common to central Oklahoma. It is not bad luck. It is physics. The warning systems improved with every event. Building codes were updated, shelter programs expanded. Each time, people still died. The gap between what science can measure and what it can prevent remains stubbornly open. And in 2011, that gap cost more lives in a single day than most Americans thought possible in the modern era. Scientists had the number. What 2011 proved was that having the number and stopping the dying are two completely different problems. Level 4. By 2011, the United States had the most sophisticated tornado warning system ever assembled. NextRad Doppler radar blankets the country. Storm watches issue hours before storms form. Average warning lead times have reached 13 minutes. Every smartphone receives emergency alerts. The system built over 6 decades was genuinely working, measurably saving lives every year. And 2011 still became the deadliest tornado year since 1936. April 27, 2011. 216 confirmed tornadoes in a single day across the southeastern United States. 11 rated EF4 or EF5. The 2011 Super Outbreak killed 348 people in 24 hours, more than the national tornado death toll in most entire years. The Tuscaloosa Birmingham EF4 tracked 80 miles through the heart of a university city of nearly 100,000 people. Apartments, restaurants, student housing. 65 people died along one storm's path. Smartphones captured dozens of angles simultaneously. The most complete visual record of a violent urban tornado ever made. It looked exactly as bad as it was. Then, May 22nd, Joplin, Missouri. EF5. The warning issued 24 minutes before impact, nearly double the national average. Meteorologists were on air with specific, urgent instructions. The emergency system activated across the region. By every operational measure, the warning system performed as designed. The Joplin tornado still killed 161 people, the highest single tornado death toll since modern record-keeping began, making it simultaneously the best-warned major tornado in American history and one of the most deadly. It stripped bark off trees, drove straw into utility poles, removed entire neighborhoods down to the concrete slabs. A 6-story reinforced concrete hospital was effectively destroyed. Staff pushed patients in gurneys into interior hallways. Some made it. The structure held enough that people in the most interior rooms survived. Others didn't. The tornado was on the ground for 22 miles and took roughly 38 minutes to cross the city. For those 38 minutes, there was nowhere safer to be than underground. Most people in Joplin did not have that option. Warning time is the most powerful variable science can control. It is not the only variable. When a mile-wide EF5 moves through a city, 24 minutes saves most people. It does not save everyone because some of the structures those people are sheltering in simply cannot withstand what is happening outside. Everything we knew pointed towards something even harder to explain. On May 31st, 2013, the sky over Oklahoma produced a tornado that broke the measurement system itself. Level 5, May 31st, 2013. A tornado emergency was in effect west of Oklahoma City. Experienced storm chasers, some of the best field meteorologists in the world, positioned their vehicles in zones that their instruments and years of direct experience confirmed as safe. The storm touched down at 6:03 p.m. Then it started growing. Mobile radar units recorded the circulation expanding in real time. Meteorologists relayed what they were seeing to colleagues, and then the colleagues asked them to repeat the number. At its peak, the El Reno tornado was 2.6 miles wide, the widest tornado ever recorded in all of documented human history, wider than the island of Manhattan. So broad that standing at one edge of its circulation, you could not see the other. It wasn't a funnel anymore in any visual sense. It was a moving geographic feature. Then it turned, sharply, violently, without warning, in a direction it had given no indication it would move. Storm chasers who had spent decades in the field described it later as a motion that violated their instincts, their instruments, and their models simultaneously. The tornado didn't behave like a tornado. It behaved like something the language of storm chasing hadn't developed words for yet. Tim Samaras had spent more than 20 years instrumenting violent tornadoes and contributed genuinely important data to science. He was in the field with his son Paul and colleague Carl Young. Their positioning was defensible by every conventional storm motion model. The tornado moved where tornadoes are not supposed to move, and it killed all 3 of them. El Reno killed 8 people that evening, and 3 were among the most experienced tornado researchers alive. El Reno was rated EF3 for most of its track, with a brief EF5 peak in open fields where no structures stood to rate. This exposed a real flaw in the damage-based rating system. The enhanced Fujita scale goes blind in open land. The widest tornado in history may have been significantly more intense than its official classification reflects, and science has no way to retroactively know. What meteorologists still cannot fully explain is why El Reno grew to 2.6 miles, why it turned the way it did, and whether a future tornado could combine that width with Bridge Creek Moore's wind speed directly over a city. The atmospheric science does not rule it out. In 2013, Oklahoma saw 78 tornadoes across a 2-week stretch in May. Moore on the 20th, El Reno on the 31st. One killed children in a school, the other killed the scientists trying to understand why. The instruments were in the field. The warnings were active. The most experienced researchers alive were watching in real time. The atmosphere didn't notice. Whatever comes next will be measured against 2013. And 2013, like every year before it, will eventually be surpassed.